welcome everyone to the Tuesday, August 18th edition of the Urban Design Panel. The Urban Design Panel is a group of a multidisciplinary group of professionals designated, I don't know how many years ago, created by founding folks such as Patty Tillett, John Spencer, Dave Oddie. I'm a current co-chair. My name is David McElnay. I'm a registered architect and a member in good standing at the AIA. The AIA Portland is good enough to host us here today through this Zoom meeting. I wanted to point out, and it's in the chat function is on. This is being recorded by AIA Portland. Kurt Wilson, the executive director, and Adrian Morris are here today in the role of host. We are going to be taking questions and answers through the chat function. One of our board members is going to be kind of curating that, and when the presentation is over, we'll go into Q&A. Expect this presentation to last about 20 minutes. So today is going to be a presentation by Megan Neill, designated project manager at Multnomah County for the what's called the Earthquake Ready Burnside Bridge project. As an urban design panel presentation, we are very interested in the impact and implications of what they're doing in terms of how the bridge connects into the city of Portland, specifically the bridge heads on either side, as much as the iconic kind of span over the river. So we're looking forward to hearing all about that. Megan, please take it away.
Great, thank you. Just want to first off say thank you for putting this together and providing us with an opportunity to present to this group. We're very excited to present in front of architects, especially since the location of the Earthquake Ready Burnside Bridge project is in the center of Portland. So we're very interested in having discussions about what our projects should be considering as we move forward. So just a reminder, like David said, my name is Megan Neill. I'm with Multnomah County Transportation Division. I am the project manager for the Earthquake Ready Burnside Bridge project. And here with me today is Steve Drahota from HDR, who is the technical lead for the project. And we just wanted to give a brief status update about the project. I know we have not been to this group before, and we could certainly present for the whole hour, but we want to just provide a brief 20 to 30 minute presentation and then open the floor up to Q&A. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. So on the next slide, just would like to briefly touch on why is this county deciding to undertake this major mega project. And there's a couple of reasons that we have narrowed it down to. And it really primarily starts from the fact that if a big earthquake happened tomorrow, none of the downtown bridges would survive. Many would be out for months up to years. And being that the county is one of the few owners of one of our regional lifeline route across the river, we really felt like that we should do something. And the Burnside Bridge is on a county-owned regional lifeline route, so we would like to bring the Burnside Bridge up to current seismic code so that it can be able to withstand the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake and be ready to go after it happens for all users to help our community respond and recover. So in addition to helping our community respond and recover, we really feel like a link across the river in the many years after the major earthquake is going to be critical to rebuilding our economy. We feel like not only do we need help moving debris out of the way and then bringing in construction materials to build back stronger, we just need to kind of show the community that we have a strong, resilient piece of infrastructure to give confidence to have jobs come back to the community, businesses come back to the community, and people wanting to stay here. So while it's not a panacea for all of our resiliency issues in the region, it's what the county can do as their part with the assets that we own. And then finally, the bridge itself is 94 years old. It is showing its age, and it's served our region for a very long time, and we would like something in its place to continue to serve our region for 100 more years. So we're looking for something that is gonna stick around, be easy to maintain, and work for this region for the future. So that's just at a high level why we feel like this project is important. And next, I just want to touch on our timeline. Apologies for just coming to you guys now in 2020. We've actually been working since 2016 on this project. We started with a 2-year feasibility study whereby we analyzed over 100 different options for a seismically resilient crossing and narrowed it down to a short list of alternatives that we plan to advance into the environmental review phase. So we wrapped that up in 2018, and we have been working on the environmental review phase since 2019, and we are about halfway through. We plan to publish a draft EIS this coming January, and followed by a final EIS combined with a record of decision in October of 2021. So right now, we are in the process of, we worked with our community task force and a variety of other stakeholders to identify a recommended preferred alternative to be included in the draft EIS, and you're going to hear about a little bit more about that in the presentation today. One thing I wanted to draw your attention to is that there's this light blue bar called type selection. And that is, that represents a little bit of early design work that needs to happen in order to meet the more streamlined federal permitting process recently coming out of the current federal administration. So we also would like—
Hey, Rich. I wanted to give you the heads up. I just got off the phone with Gary. He's
Oh, okay. Thought that was a question. Okay, so we wanted to also talk a little bit about that today, what that means. And again, it's something we have to do in order to meet the more streamlined NEPA permitting process. So we are currently funded through the design phase, the blue bar, through our recently raised county vehicle registration fee. We raised it by $37 per year per vehicle specifically for this project. And while that does not get us through the construction phase, we are very grateful to be a project that is considered in part of the upcoming Get Moving 2020 bond measure. And on top of that, we are working on funding strategies at the state and federal level. But I can say today, we are funded through design, and we are moving forward with the design phase. So next slide, I just wanted to go over that short list of alternatives that we have been evaluating in the environmental review phase. And starting at the top, we have what we call an enhanced seismic retrofit, which is largely preserving the existing bridge today, replacing components that have reached the end of the service life, but bringing the current bridge up to current seismic code. Now, the second option is proposing a new movable bridge, same location, same alignment, same touchdown points, with conventional span length, so distances between the support columns, less than what there's out there today, but we're calling that the replacement short span alternative. And we're exploring that in either a bascule movable span option, or like there's out there today, or the vertical lift movable span option, like say the Hawthorne Bridge. Next up, we have an alternative that's a little bit different than the replacement short span. We call it the replacement long span. It's again a new structure in the same alignment, same touchdown points, however, with longer distances between the support columns. It's hard to tell if you look at the two middle images, the support columns below are in dark orange. So you can see how there are less of those dark orange support columns in the river if you compare the two alternatives. And we are exploring this option as well, either a bascule movable span or a vertical lift movable span. And then finally, we have an alternative that is also a replacement bridge, same alignment, same touchdown points. However, in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, this alternative proposes extending Couch Street straight out over I-5 and the railroad, connecting to the bridge in midspan over the river. And the concept behind this alternative was that after the earthquake happens, this is one of the few bridges that are still standing. A lot of traffic would need to be using this bridge, including large trucks, heavy freight, and that tight S-curve on Couch that takes you onto the bridge today would presumably present a bottleneck. So we thought that straightening that curve out, or just bypassing it and straightening the street, had some merit. So that we call that option the replacement Couch extension option. So those are the four we've been evaluating. And as I mentioned, we have worked with our community task force to select one as the recommended preferred alternative to be included in our upcoming draft EIS report. And that alternative is the replacement long span. And I just want to walk through a little bit of a few of the reasons why this alternative is scoring very well in our evaluation process. But first of all, I just wanted to walk through the image on the screen. So what is presented here is just a concept of what a long span bridge could look like. What is shown in the center of the river is a vertical lift, movable span type. And then flanking it on either side are tied arches, similar to the Fremont Bridge or Savi's Island Bridge. And this is one of the fixed span structure types that we are exploring in our type selection study phase, the tied arch. We are also exploring cable stay options, similar to the Tillicum Bridge, and then we're also exploring a through truss option, similar to the Hawthorne Bridge or the Broadway Bridge. And then as you can see in the lower right-hand corner of the graphic, we are looking at a bascule type as there is today as well. So these are just a little bit of a preview of what we are going to be evaluating in the type selection phase. But just if I can draw your attention to the shorelines on either side of the river here, I just wanted to note that there really are not any foundations at the shoreline like there is today. And that is one of the key benefits or features of this alternative. And I just want to talk through some of the benefits that have come with that decision. And Steve is highlighting that the first columns that touch down on land on the west side of the structure is right before NATO Parkway. So just to kind of give you a sense of kind of difference of what's out there today. So next, I just wanted to walk through at a high level some benefits of this alternative before diving into them a little bit in more detail. So when we developed our evaluation criteria and our technical team looked into all the alternatives, we found that this alternative was the best in terms of seismic resiliency because we are having less foundations in the river that reduces structure in highly liquefiable soils, which sets the structure up to perform better than other alternatives in the event of an earthquake. And then while it does look like a lot of structure, it actually is the least cost alternative of the lot, primarily because the less you build in the structure in the ground, the less risk you have overall, which can be costly to a project, and less ground improvements that you'll need to make in this liquefiable zone. So it is the cost leader of all of our alternatives, and that range right now is sitting at 825 million to 950 million, and that's all in soup to nuts for the project, escalated to the mid-year of construction. And then this alternative actually allows us to preserve or enhance some existing community resources. So the two that are top of mind for me are first, the Burnside Skate Park. Through this alternative, we will only be impacting the skate park so far as temporary closures. So the skate park itself will be able to remain largely in the state it is today. So that's definitely a win for the project to date. And then we feel like the removal of many of the columns in Tom McCall Waterfront Park enhances that area. So it provides more open space, more open views, more possibilities for using that space, and just a general, more overall enhanced user experience. So those are what we mean by enhanced and preserving community resources. And then next, because this alternative is preserving a replacement versus a retrofit, we are able to widen the typical section of the structure slightly on either sides, about 10 feet. And we would allocate this additional space to bringing the existing bike lanes and sidewalks up to current city code. This actually also even affords us some space to put a physical barrier between the vehicles and the bike lane, which is something that we often hear from the community because the bridge is very wide and open, and a lot of people kind of speed as they go over it, which can provide an unsafe feeling for cyclists crossing the bridge. Next to last, again, because we have less structure in the river as well as the river banks, this alternative scored well in terms of impacts to natural resources. So that's certainly key when you're doing an environmental impact statement. There are some concerns, though, with this alternative, and that we will be taking that into consideration as we move forward. And it's due to the fact that we have these long spans with long distances between the support columns. To make the design work, we need to have the structure go from underneath the bridge to above the bridge deck, underneath the bridge deck to above the bridge deck. And we're hearing a lot of concerns about the impacts to the views that this structure may have, as well as the impact to just the overall experience compared to the current bridge. Currently, it's wide open, no impacts to views to the city on either end. And so we'll be working through these concerns and looking at ways to mitigate that in our type selection phase. So I have explained a lot of the benefits verbally, but I just wanted to show some images to reinforce some of the benefits that I mentioned. So I mentioned that this alternative was the best for seismic resiliency, and so I just wanted to kind of explain that. In the graphics you see on the screen, the light orange shaded area is the liquefiable soils, and the dark orange columns represent the proposed support structure. So as you can see, the replacement long span on the top row has the least structure in that highly liquefiable zone, and that we feel sets this structure up the best for the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. And then next, we also developed some views of the changes one might expect to Tomahawk Waterfront Park and the skate park. So on the top left image on your screen, we're showing the cable stay option, and you can see when compared to the image on the bottom right, there's just fewer columns than what's out there today. The image on the lower right-hand side is the seismic retrofit, which would largely just increase the size of the existing columns that are out there today. And then the lower left-hand image is just another option that was considered the replacement short span. So you're seeing here fewer columns than the seismic retrofit, but more than the replacement long span. And in the top right image, it's hard to tell, but that's a skate park under there in the replacement long span. And we would effectively chop off the existing support structure that's in the skate park today and we'll truncate it at the top and then just build the new bridge over top, but largely preserving the skate park as it is today. And then next I wanted to show visually what the wider typical section could look like. You see on either side we have, we're proposing 8-foot sidewalks and bike lanes, as well as a physical separation that could occur. And this particular alternative shown is the tight arch alternative. So currently, I don't know if many people are aware, but the bridge is hourglass shaped. Today, it's about 110 feet over land, and it necks down to 86 feet over the river before it widens back out to 110. So with the replacement structure, we would just convert that hourglass shape to a rectangle. Okay, next I just wanted to talk a little bit about some changes in access to the bridge that we are currently looking at. So right now on the west end of the bridge, we have the 2 staircases for TriMet, going from the TriMet Skidmore Max Station to the top of the bridge. So this alternative proposes replacing those staircases and installing an ADA ramp on the south side of the bridge, combined with a staircase and just a staircase on the north side of the bridge. So this will be a great opportunity to provide ADA access where there is none today, or more difficult ADA access than there is today. But again, these are just conceptual early images. We are working through them with our agency partners and stakeholders. We just wanted to share that today. And then on the bottom of your screen in the image in yellow is what an ADA ramp would look like if it went from the East Bank Esplanade all the way up to the bridge today. So right now there's just a staircase with a non-working mechanical chair. So we would like to provide ADA access. What you see on the screen is if we were to follow the design code for grade. And so again, we are working with our agency partners and stakeholders about this ramp, and but I just wanted to just share that with this group today as just kind of different ideas of what we're looking at in terms of access. And then in our SketchUp model, we did render some views to try to understand and identify the impacts that the structure could have on the sightlines while on the bridge. Most notably, the impact to the views of the Portland, Oregon sign, which is a, I think on the city's designated city landmark. So on the screen, you see various views of the sign from the bridge, and the bridge is showing a variety of structure types, such as the tight arch on the left-hand side and the cable stay on the right-hand side. And this is looking west, and then the following set of images is looking east, which shows, again, the view of from the structure in a car for either a cable stayed option or a tied arch option. So we have heard from many voices that if we could minimize the height of the structure, that would be preferred. Okay, well, now I'd like to hand over the presentation to Steve. We'd like to share with this group a little bit about the bridge type selection process and have some discussion questions that we'd like to pose to the group. So Steve, you'd like to hand it off to you.
I've got it. Feel free to get a glass of water. So the next few slides really get into what this long span is, and it represents, just like Megan said, a family of different options. And it really is hard to mix and match all the options with the movable in a one cohesive place. If you think of it almost to be a grid the size of, if you're looking at the grid of people watching on Zoom right now. So what we've tried to do is develop what are the fixed approaches to the middle movable span. And that's what's being shown in these words that we have. So cable stay, no different than the Tillicum, just height could be different, proportion could be different. Again, it's a function of bridge width. And it's a much wider bridge than the Tillicum bridge. And therefore the stays themselves and the towers or the columns have to be proportioned in a way that creates a span length, especially on the east side, as you're progressing all the way from a bent in the middle of the river to the east side of the UPR railroad tracks and then beyond. We have a tied arch, which again is this sort of classical arch shape, bowstring truss, people often call this, and it creates again another form of a long span with very prominent features based on the arch ribs themselves, the inclination, whether you have lattice, cross framing, and all that, all those things to be determined in the future. And then at the bottom, you have kind of more of a classic truss style, fairly long truss members, much longer than the bridge out there today. This is an above deck truss versus a below deck truss, which is out there today. And because of its span length, it actually gets longer. And some of the questions are, how come you can't make a truss go below the bridge just like is out there today? Well, it's because of where those column locations are placed. As they're moved out, they get longer, deeper, and you don't have the navigational clearances, so it has to go above the deck. So these are three different options of an array of other options that we'll be considering during this type selection phase. Then when you think about mixing that with some form of movable span in the middle, you have the bascule, which is very similar to what's out there today, of some form and style. And then you have a lift bridge that is comparable to the Hawthorne, for example. But again, the towers of the lift bridge are a variable, and they can look very different. And so these are some very prominent design features that will be explored to some degree during type selection and primarily during a final design phase, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So when you think of the matrix of opportunities here, it's really about some combination option of a movable span with this fixed span on either side. And so to help understand what this array could be, and really to help educate the public on it, we're not picking a thing right now. We're trying to whittle down from this array to what type of approach span with what kind of movable span as we end type selection. And even within, if you were to look at these various examples, there are a few different types. Actually, there's many, many different types: looks, feels, color, texture, inclination, all of that, regardless of what that option is. So the top row are various examples of tied arches. The Hastings Bridge, for example, has no lattice members in between these arch ribs. That means the arch ribs are very large. The other bridges, including one in Siuslaw, over the Siuslaw River, is a different form of an arch bridge, framing in this case, to a movable bascule in the middle. So this one looks very similar to what could be, obviously, more historic in the way that the aesthetics are looked and the span lengths are established. But there's a whole array of different options that come with a tied arch. Just like if you go to the cable stay on the second row, there's a whole array of different options of what is a cable stay. what are the pylon types? Is it inclined vertical pylons, or a Y-shaped, or a delta pier, or even like the Tillicum? And so this is another notable shape with different pros and cons from an erection sequence standpoint, from a constructability and costing standpoint that we'll be exploring. The third type, we mentioned that truss shape, comparable to the Broadway or the Hawthorne that exists today, or other places in Florida or California, or throughout the United States and the world, with these sort of longer truss members framing into some form of a movable bridge, in this case on the far left on Main Street, into a lift bridge. When you then turn your attention away from the fixed approaches and into the movable spans, there's really two kinds that are feasible. There are other kinds that exist in the world, but these, the bascule and the vertical, are really the most feasible for this site. And bascules come in many shapes and sizes and looks and functions. And so this just represents, a bascule doesn't have to be what you see out there today. It can be something else. And the Hastings Bridge, or I'm sorry, the South Park Bridge is similar to what's out there today. This is a very new bridge in Washington, in Seattle. And then you get some of these other very unique features as you sort of pour across the world on different bascule types. Then you have a suite of vertical lift bridges, all the way from vertical single columns on the four corners to sort of traditional closed pier systems with a lift in the middle. So again, during type selection, we're going to be looking at various opportunities for each of these types. But the key feature here is the type selection phase isn't about picking those details. It's about picking the types, then gets you to frame into the details during the final design phase. And one of the key other objectives of type selection is to help this permitting process that Megan mentioned earlier. We have lots of federal permits that have to be achieved as part of the NEPA phase, this environmental phase. And so where the foundations are in the river matter a lot. And where are the columns exactly located on the in-water piers matter a lot. And so sizing and general shape, that's what our objective is during this type selection phase. And then the many, many details that are going to be explored during the final design is where the look will really solidify itself. So one of the things we did is a pretty early activity, and some of the folks in this Zoom call were part of this discussion, is we asked an urban design working group to start thinking about interests. What could be? What are some themes, some goals, some objectives that we can start centering on, especially in this type selection phase where we want to evaluate based on some of these themes and perspectives. And there's a lot of work to be done still. I think we're right now scheduling 8 different meetings for a visual and urban designs working group to provide even more feedback and to hone some of these thoughts. But really use that to create an evaluation criteria to apply to this array, this grid of options, and help to select an alternative that then would be pushed into final design for all the details to flesh out. And so some of these bullets are what we've heard so far. Whether attributes like it's in the heart of the city, quite literally the definition of the grid, of Portland's grid, the centroid of that is dead in the middle of the bridge, right at this point, right there. So at that point, don't do it because you're in the middle of traffic, but literally stand on the 4 quadrants of the city on top of the bridge. Serving as a community connectivity. We've heard quite a bit that this is a community bridge, a bridge that connects communities on either side, as opposed to call it a more urban, regional bridge. So there's this idea of community connections and future adaptability. And what does that mean that since this bridge is going to be here for 100 years, to activate the spaces below or around the bridge? What does it mean to get access when you're thinking long-term to and from the bridge, and the user's experience from every mode? And when you think of every mode, there is truly every mode at this bridge in and around the site at some point. as Megan mentioned, the purpose and need is all about seismic resiliency, the expectation that this is the one bridge that has to be there when this large earthquake hits, and it could hit in 10 years, 30 years, 50 years, whatever it is, but it has to be that central point where people can cross the river, whether it's people escaping or it's emergency services coming to help recover. It has to serve all those purposes. It's recognized for its historic value and the fact that it links the historic old town on one side and the very modern East Bridgehead on the other side. And so what does this bridge mean as you're looking at these very different aesthetic features and potential themes as you're crossing over the river in the heart of downtown Portland? So that's just some of the initial thoughts that we had. And so we wanted to pause there and open the conversation up with really kind of two types of questions. What should we be thinking about as we move into the type selection phase? And then a second question of what are the best ways to keep you and the design community involved, especially knowing that we have a visual and urban design working group that's going to be formed and then helping. So I'll pause here and I guess open it up for a conversation, some thoughts from you guys.
Steve, this is Patty Tillett. Oh, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
I was just going to let Steve know there was one question I saw that came in on the chat that asked, could you describe the pros and cons of the lift versus the bascule for the movable span? Pardon me, Patty.
Yes. So general pros and cons. For one, so right now the bascule bridge, and whether you knew it or not, this bridge is pretty historic in that it's generally as long as a basket, meaning this sort of rotating bridge as you can get. One of the opportunities that we have with a lift bridge is that you can pull those piers apart and create a much wider opening in the center of the river. So that's one basic functional opportunity. Regardless, a modern bascule, modern lift, relatively the same amount of time to open and close. Although the reality is with a lift bridge, you may not have to go as far up. You can only go maybe halfway up, depending on the boat size it gets through, and bring it back down, and that becomes a reduced closure time for vehicles and pedestrians and bicyclists that want to cross the bridge. We're also finding that the lift bridge, and there's some debate about this, and so I'm going to be a heretic a little bit, but from a bridge seismic standpoint, we're starting to find that having a bascule bridge is better from a seismic stability standpoint. You have 4 different locations to support a movable bridge, and the way that it seats itself in this large earthquake, magnitude 9 plus or minus earthquake. Remember, it has to seat itself, and we have to design for it in an open position because the earthquake could happen then, just like in a closed position. And so making sure that for a bascule, all of the different movements that happen, including scour and liquefaction that's going to occur in and around the bridge, has to be designed for so that when the bascule leaves closed, they still have a very, very small gap so people can cross. So it's frankly, we're finding that the lift bridge is better at resisting and controlling deformations from a seismic event. So generally speaking, we're also finding that the lift is costing a little less because of the deep foundations that are at the corners. So it's kind of a gamut of different pros and cons about each of the movable styles, but we're going to know a lot more in about 6 months than even what I'm talking about today.
Steve, I've got a comment which is rather general before we get into the detailed stuff. First of all, I think the engineering decisions that have been made so far are absolutely spot on. I don't have any argument with them. But the point is that from now on, people are hugely influenced by what they actually see. I know you quite rightly said, these are concepts, these are not designs. But what they see is a huge influence, especially when it comes to blocking of views and so forth. So I went to look at the replacement bridge in Genoa in Italy. You remember 2 years ago, it collapsed. And already they've got the new bridge up and running. They had national funding, so they could move much faster. But the point I want to make is that recognizing the sensitivity people have to what it looks like they combined this engineering concept stage with the design concept stage. So they went out to Santiago de Calatrava to come up with illustrations of all the different bridge types, and those are all, as you would expect, extremely elegant. And I think that that begins to help a great deal. I mean, looking at what's there now, I know that a number of my architectural colleagues are going to say, geez, those towers look so clunky. You know, can't we do better than that? And that becomes the focus. So what I would request is that you bring the designers in sooner rather than later so that we begin to transition into what the bridge would actually look like early on. That was also done in France with the Millau Bridge, which you probably know it's a series of 7 cable stays. And Norman Foster was the design consultant on that. And he was on from day one. I mean, not just this stage, but day one. So I would really ask you to focus on design sooner rather than later in order to get honest assessments from all the people you talk to. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. And one of the attendees today is Michael Fitzpatrick. Michael Fitzpatrick is a bridge architect within HDR. This is literally his first week starting. So while we didn't have him on day one, hopefully we have, from this point forward, he's on day one. So he will be taking the work that we've developed and participating in that visual and urban design workshop, and then trying to help the engineering team hone the drawings to be more consistent and frankly push us to say, how do we make sure that scale, just like is being shown here, isn't too large, it isn't too bulky. And at the same time, on the engineering side of the house, we're going through our conceptual engineering to try to size in a manner that represents true to life elements. So your point is really well taken. I think you've seen, even in this presentation, the evolution from the list of 4 options that Megan had in the early slides to how those have evolved into what we're seeing here. The natural next step is to evolve even what we're seeing here into something else as we progress forward. So you're spot on. And as we were talking before the presentation started, I should have said this earlier, these are based, all these drawings are based on not just concept, but we don't even have true engineering sizing performed yet. So our objective is to go for a reduction and a more transparent feel as we're looking at each one of these options. So well stated, and I'm looking forward to watching this progress with everybody.
There's another chat item there, Steve.
Yeah, well, David, yeah, he's the one that put that up there. So go ahead, David. Why don't you just...
Sure, I can speak to that. I was just sort of flapping it out on the keyboard, but what I have written is, does the county or the design teams have a set of urban design guidelines regarding the bridgehead connectivity for community? Whether that's being formed early on. It sounds sort of like a general kind of thing, but it actually folds right into what you were just responding to, Steve, in terms of Patty's question, which is the second you kind of move some set points up further into the process, the longer they have a chance to grow in everyone's mind. So, you know, we definitely don't want to see a purely vehicle-dominated conversation. The priority for emergency situations ultimately is running a lot of vehicles across that bridge. But, you know, what does it do for the rest of its life in terms of, you know, Megan pointed out the points about cleaning out the underside of the bridge. Certain options open up spaces that are under the bridge that right now are fairly dingy and not that great, certainly on the west side. Are there some guidelines or some thoughts towards that?
Yeah, I can take that one. It's definitely on the work plan agenda for our urban design working group to come up with a design vision, goals, and objectives for this project, taking into account the variety of urban design guidelines we already are aware of and have been collecting. And so we don't really have something to share today, but it's certainly something that we would be happy to check in with this group on as it develops. And then to your second point about the space under the bridge, it's very interesting site because the county actually doesn't own any of the right-of-way under the bridge. I think we have a little sliver on the drip line of the bridge when the street was widened back in the day to construct this bridge, but the bridge is largely on city right-of-way. So it's really going to be a collaborative process with the city and other agency partners, specifically parks actually, on how we reconstruct the space under the bridge when we close out the it's certainly not something that we can decide on, or we have the authority to decide on our own, but we are well aware that this is an opportunity to reshape that space. So it's definitely going to be a joint effort.
Well, that's great. And I'm sure that you had those kinds of thoughts in your mind, and I just wanted to kind of get it out there. I will say that it is so critically important to think strategically at a moment like this while we're sort of churning through the facts and checking the environmental review and the kind of engineering options and costs, in to make simple statements like, is this an either or kind of project, or is it going to be a both and kind of project? And I would argue that the only way for it to critically succeed, if, as Steve points out, it's at the actual nexus of the city, right in the center of the city, that it has to be both and. It has to both serve its functional requirements and be a value add to the overall community. I'm going to add a couple more examples and then I'll stop talking. That Patty had brought up some really great ones. Another one that I think is also Norman Foster is the Millennium Bridge in London, where they solved the problem of how do you do a suspension-based bridge, but then lay that structure down so that it's not a visual impediment and it takes on a whole different kind of elegance in the cityscape. So that's a pretty brilliant sort of making lemonade out of lemons type of example. And there's also a new bridge or a replacement bridge going on in Washington, D.C. right now that's in design phase, which is being envisioned as a kind of a green boulevard. And I think OMA is on the design team there. Anyway, I'll stop there and look. I'm going to take a look for other questions here.
Well, yeah, I just was looking, Michael O'Brien's got a question about the design process moving forward. And I would just like to add on to that by, you mentioned a working, urban design working group, and you've had a group, it sounds like, that you mentioned before. Is that it? You mentioned something about a changed or a new working group or whatever. Could you elaborate on that a little bit, Megan?
Yeah, I think we're going to meet with Patty and Randy Gregg here shortly to really strategize around the makeup of that group. I think we put together a small group early on just to kind of get the conversation started, but now that we're at this particular point in the project where we have a preferred alternative and we're starting type selection, we want to broaden the group and bring in more design professionals, some more community partners, and start to look at what the agendas of those 8 meetings are going to be and what do we need to accomplish in time for our final EIS. So we don't have all those details set yet. We are looking at the Tillicum crossing group. Maybe it was like a urban advisory group or something of that title like that, but looking at how what that group did and the types of members who sat on that group to see if we may want to model our group off of that.
Okay, Michael, did you have an additional part of your question?
Yeah, it's kind of related to all this, and it's kind of the process moving forward. It's unclear in my mind, you know, who's doing what. You mentioned parks in that mix. The county's obviously in there. Hearing a lot from Patty about the design, getting into that earlier than later, I think is absolutely necessary. But I'm curious, as we walk through some of the examples, there's a lot of very well-known designers in that other bridge discussion that David and others have mentioned. And I'm curious how the county is approaching the aesthetics of this. And I would not be able to say this strongly enough, the importance that this one bridge in the city, in the center of the city, is designed extraordinarily well and is innovative and thoughtful and does a number of things other than just moving vehicles. So I'll just kind of leave it there.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that comment. I think that's one of the reasons why we're out here briefing groups, is to listen to the comments and hear topics that we should be considering moving forward that will help influence and shape this urban design working group. And I just wanted to briefly mention that our project is how our project is structured in terms of our subcommittee groups. So we also have, we actually have, I think maybe 14 different working groups as part of this process, with urban design being one of them. And then all the information that is coming out of the working groups feeds up into a community task force that is about 22 or so members of the community that represent a cross-section of businesses, neighborhood associations, river users, social service providers, community members at large that are directly impacted by the project. And then we have a policy group of elected officials who receive recommendations from key milestones from the policy from the community task force, and then the policy group makes recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners, and then ultimately FHWA, who is the lead agency for the project. So with that bit of information, I just want to kind of show you more of the broad encompassing nature of our project and who we're working with. And certainly the city is a huge partner in this project. We have a city technical advisory group, and we've been keeping each of their commissions and city councils, been doing a number of commission briefings and council briefings as well. And I think our project pretty much touches every bureau right now.
So Sean Betty just posted a question about the ped bike connection to the to the bridge deck from both sides, and talks about, is there a position or allowance for elevator cores in that design? So I wonder if Steve maybe should answer that question.
Yeah. And as Megan was talking, I was slipping over to some of this early concept on the either end. The top, again, as a reminder, is the west end, and the bottom picture is an access bridge to get to the East Bank Esplanade. So from a big picture standpoint, there's been some conversations that have occurred regarding access points onto the bridge. On the west side, preserving that access down to the Skidmore station is an important one, and building in where it's feasible and reasonable, and ADA access, which is shown in the upper left-hand picture. On the other side of the bridge, frankly, if you put a ramp in without taking the entire sidewalk space, you'd wrap around to the building to the point where you could take the sidewalk off the bridge, and so there's no extenuating value. On the east side of the bridge is one of the larger conversations that we're still having, this concept of this East Bank Esplanade Bridge, shown in yellow to highlight where the location is, not because it's a color, but just to highlight where it is and what it would mean to achieve this 50 to 60 foot grade differential from on top of the bridge down to the East Bank Esplanade. We're still exploring concepts to how to make that work, and we're still looking at the ideas of what does it mean and how do you connect into the bridge in a safe and a convenient manner. So more conversations are happening along those lines. We are considering elevators. Frankly, elevators are a challenge for municipal agencies, as most of you know. from a SEPTED safety principle standpoint, from a functionality point, but they're still being considered. If you're referring to elevators within the towers themselves in the middle of the river, it's something that we haven't, frankly, put a lot of thought into yet, as we're trying to scale and size the different members themselves. And so that's some of the features that we are going to continue talking about at this Visual and Urban Design Working Group and in the type selection and beyond. Understanding that there are some safety elements that go with these large foundation elements in the middle of a river. So more to come on that front.
Okay, I don't see any other questions on the chat room. We are all at about 1 o'clock, but I would invite anybody who's got a burning question or just need more information about something to speak up.
While everybody's thinking about that, this is David McElnay again. I'm just going to do a brief thing regarding the urban design panel here hosted by the AIA Portland. We often bring the same presentations back over time, presenters back over time as the project unfolds, and we'd be very happy to do just that. And everyone can tune in, stay in touch with Megan and her team, and see how things are unfolding. That's something to keep in mind, and that this is the beginning of a conversation where really the opportunities to tap into many decades, if not centuries, of experience here in Portland in terms of a broad range of professionals. So, for example, in the executive committee for the urban design panel, we have 2 landscape architects, 1 planner, and 2 architects who also function as urban design or urban design direction. So it's a broad, on purpose, a broad set of skill sets, and we'd be very happy to be a kind of a conduit for increasing your conversations, Megan.
Yeah, there are 2 planners, actually, 2.
2 planners, pardon me.
There's 2 of each, yes.
That would be great. We would love to come back and brief the group. I think we'll be doing additional rounds of briefings during our formal comment period after the draft EIS is published in January. And then I think that also is a milestone point for our type selection phase as well, possibly Steve. But in the meantime, please feel free to submit any comments, thoughts, or questions to burnsidebridge@mulco.us. And then if you have any questions regarding to the city involvement and participation, again, Patrick Sweeney is our project liaison out of the Capital Project Group, and his address is also in the chat window. And just really appreciate the opportunity again to come here to this group. And I think we are very aware and about this upcoming the upcoming decisions about the bridge look and feel. I mean, we're still years away from construction, and we're hoping to put in a process that this group feels comfortable with and feels like they have strong representatives on the group and that their voice is heard. So we'll definitely be back early next year.
Fantastic. Well, we are scheduled to wrap this up right now at 1 o'clock. So I see, as you say, the comments are coming in the chat side for people's contact information. The AIA Portland has also graciously agreed to be a conduit of information out and connect people with the right people. This has been recorded, and if you look up in the chats, you'll see links and opportunities there. I also noticed that Kurt Wilson found the link to the bridge I was referring to, the 11th Street Bridge in Washington, D.C., indeed done by OMA and Olin Partnership. So with that, everyone, we're going to say thank you very much, Megan. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Patrick, and everyone that's involved in the project. Excited to have more interaction, and good luck with everything. We hope to see you again here at the panel.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, David.
You bet. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.